Introducing Winning the Pastor and the Pew. How to get the must-reach faith-driven consumer audience to endorse and support your project. Moderated by Matthew Faraci, EVP Communications, Faith-Driven Entertainment.
Hi, good morning. I'm Matthew Faraci, the EVP of Communications with Faith-Driven Entertainment. And on our illustrious panel today, joining us to my left is Mark Ordesky, who produced When at New Line 3 films that nobody's ever heard of, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Anybody? Anyone? Okay. And also his partner, Jane Fleming, is here today. Jane, are you here? Okay, there's Jane. Our friend, by the way, our friend Devon Franklin wanted to be here with us today, but Derrick's got him in Atlanta, so we'll get to that in a minute. We also have here John Shepard, who's president of MPower Pictures. He's got a lot of different credits, Bella, Machine Gun Preacher. He's got a Star of Bethlehem and some other projects that he's working on right now. And actually, we go way back with John because his partner, Steve McAveety, we worked with on The Passion of the Christ 10 years ago. So here we have Derrick Williams, who runs all things Bishop Jakes Film and Entertainment, and he's an expert also in marketing and has invented some really new innovative ways to reach the faith audience, which we're going to hear about today. And last but not least, Chris Stone, founder of Faith-Driven Consumer. A lot of people first heard of Faith-Driven Consumer a couple of years ago when they did a campaign called I Stand With Phil, which got Phil Robertson back on Duck Dynasty after a quick hiatus. And Chris has had a lot to say, particularly been a go-to guy to the media who's looking to understand that faith-driven consumer and that faith audience. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first question here for Chris. We're talking about the pastor in the pew today. According to a survey done by American Insights, there are 25.4 million people who will watch at least 3 additional hours of faith and family content a week, and 11.5 million who will actually watch 6 hours or more every week. Can you tell us about this market segment, the core fanboy for faith and family entertainment?
Absolutely. Consider, we're all in the industry here. Consider, is there another opportunity to get that many people who have pent-up demand to watch the content that we're creating? It is a wonderful market. We have discovered and defined this market of faith-driven consumers. As Matthew said, the fanboy of the overall faith and family market, 41 million people, 17% of the population, who have in the economy $2 trillion to spend. We have done lots of research. We have analyzed this to endless degrees. And every time there's a chart up on the board, every time that we target and hit this core base, the product does much better. And any time that we target outside, it's much more difficult. So this is just a wonderful market, the core of the market, and one that we're happy to bring to your awareness.
So Derrick, Bishop Jakes sat almost right where you're sitting last year and had probably one of the most memorable quotes at Purpose last year, which he said, don't make whatever movie you want and hire a Christian marketing firm and expect us to like it. So when Bishop Jakes, of course, beats around the bush, right? So when you, in your work, when people bring projects to you, can you give us a little bit about some of the criteria that you look at to say, this is something we could be involved in, and also thinking about some of the churches that you work with as well?
Well, I think it's the same thing that most people are looking for. Great content. It starts with a great story. And I think it's sometimes we think that the faith-based audience is not smart enough to know that content is important. What it is that you're saying is very important. The production value of what they're seeing. I mean, we're going and we're watching movies just like everyone else, and so you can't really pull a wool over our eyes. And if you're going to do biblical content, then it has to be accurate. And I think what Bishop was saying is more from the standpoint of including us in that process, because this is a great platform for us, but you need to include us from the beginning so that the story that you're telling, we can feel that it's a story that resonates with the audience, and there's a reflection of our values. And so that's what I would say to that.
And actually, we have, if you guys look on your seats, there's a little screen wipe for you that takes you to untappedaudience.com, and we have polling on that, and our polling shows that the number one in the biblical genre, accuracy is the number one factor for faith-driven consumers. Right. Which brings us to a perfect segue for Mark. Mark, when you were producing The Lord of the Rings, which, by the way, are 3 of the biggest faith-based films that nobody knows are faith-based films, you said something really interesting to me the other day, that you had the book with you on the set, that Ian McKellen had the book. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's really consistent with what we're talking about. When we were making the films, it was very, very important, even though you could not film every single scene in the 1,100 pages of The Lord of the Rings, that the spirit and the integrity of the books came through in the 11 hours of movies that we were making. So Peter Jackson had the book, I had the book, Ian McKellen had the book, so that if there was ever a question of doubt about, like, well, is this landing, is this right, is this sort of vibrating on the right frequency, one didn't have to wonder about it. And I definitely see a big, big parallel to what we're talking about, because that was our source material, and we wanted to do it right.
So, following up on that, John, I'm going to give you the easy question. You ready for this one? This is the $1 million question. So,
no math.
So, no math. So, what was, kind of following up on this flow, the magic that came with the Passion of the Christ that the industry has not been able to capture since in the same magnitude?
I mean, I have to look at The Passion, because that was Steve's movie, really, as a consumer, is what was the magic. I think, first of all, it was groundbreaking. It was the first. They did something nobody had ever done before. Mm-hmm. I think they were driven by their convictions. They didn't want to pander to the audience, but on the other hand, they were not going to compromise to try and soften the message. I think it was about being authentic. And I think where we miss the mark sometimes in the follow-up to that is trying to be, and we used this word last night, I think at dinner we got together and talked about, we're earnest, but we're not authentic. And as believers, I think we need to be driven by our conviction and stand for something and tell stories where it rings true not only to the church but to the world as authentic, even if it has some flaws and warts and all. So that's how I'd address that.
And Derrick, following up on that, I mean, you had one of the most successful faith-based films last year. So how do you react to what John's talking about?
Well, I mean, I think he said it all. I think it's also about getting the right team. You know, we had a director, Randall Wallace, who really understood the marketplace. And I think that's very important. We had a studio in Sony Pictures and Rich and Affirm Films. They really understood the content and they understood the audience. And so building the right team will also help with that process. And I think that's what helped us to be successful, right? The right content and the right team around it to support it.
So, John, I know you said no math, but I'm gonna have to violate that rule. Let me throw some data out there to you guys. Chris and Derrick, you may want to jump on this first, but I'm throwing it out to anyone. So 78% of faith-driven consumers say it has a significant influence on their decision to see a film if their church encourages it, which goes back to that content. You have to hit that content barrier. Compared to 55% in the overall Christian market. So there's a distinct behavioral difference. 57% of faith-driven consumers' churches encourage members to see specific faith-based films. So when we're engaging the church, Chris, what are you hearing in terms of, throw this out to anybody, but Chris, you hear a lot from the actual consumers and their leaders, their pastors.
Well, certainly in our industry, we have engaged in influencer marketing. We have gone to the pulpit, we've gone through the pulpit as the access to the church. And that is an excellent path, one that we do as well. But the research is now showing us that people also want to be interacted with directly. The core faith-driven consumer is about split 50-50. The general market actually prefers to be reached directly 75% of the time now. So that's an evolving thing that we need to be aware of. But the bottom line is you have to go where people are. in a diverse marketplace, whether it's the African American, the Hispanic, the LGBT, or the faith-driven consumer market, they're all functioning the same way. They want to be spoken to in a relevant manner, and they want to be spoken to directly. And that's something that, as an industry, we're going to have to perfect.
And Derrick, you said something when I mentioned to you earlier that in the research that American Insights did, we asked faith-driven consumers, do you want to be marketed to directly or through the church? And they were pretty much split 50-50 on that, whereas the larger Christian market much prefers being marketed to directly, which means that the church has a bigger influence on the faith-driven consumer. Can you talk about that?
It's a trusted brand. I mean, you believe your pastor, and you believe that your pastor will give you the right type of guidance in terms of what it is, not just what he's speaking to your life on a weekly basis, but content that he thinks will be good for you. The problem that we're having is that what we're finding is that there's so many people that are coming to you, and the content is not always the best content. And so we're getting into a situation now that we're having to tell people no, unfortunately, because the content is just either the production value is not at a level that it needs to be, or the content is not consistent with our values. And so it's that's starting to be a problem. And I'm concerned that if we do that, now the church is not going to believe that it's something that that when they get there, that we're going to deliver on the promise. And so we really need to start talking about that a little bit more as a collective group.
Yeah, and this goes to the heart, because a lot of people in this room are people that want to create content, make content. You know, just because there's a market doesn't mean, obviously, that anything will serve that market. And building a great movie, it's like putting together a great dinner party, but it starts with the leader, the filmmaker, the voice. You know, whether it's Mel Gibson or Peter Jackson, it's very hard to reverse engineer authenticity.
Absolutely.
So it's like, if you want, I always confess your biases. This happens the way that Jane and I operate. If you find the right motor, creative motor inside your project, and build it out from there, as opposed to, I've got this thing and I'm going to try to grab elements and assemble it. That works sometimes, but really you've got to build it from within. Otherwise, it's very challenging when it gets to the pastor point where you actually want someone, to advocate for you. It's really challenging at that point.
And John, having made 15 films for Billy Graham, something that a lot of people don't know about John, how do you react to that?
Well, I think that obviously, I'm assuming there's great content. There's great content makers now. We're getting more and more higher production values. I respond to that in the fact that we now have to start thinking about having the end in mind, not only having great materials, but you also have to, as a filmmaker, how am I going to engage an audience and drive an audience to come to the theaters? We've done a number of documentaries recently that have connected with the faith-based community. They're cause-connected. The studios, even the distributors, in one instance, Fathom, was a little doubtful we could drive an audience out to see a documentary. In fact, we just released one called The Dropbox, which was in Korean, and it's about adoption, and they thought, there's no stars, how are you going to drive an audience? But we partnered with a ministry that was able to drive an audience because they connected to a cause. So we started that film's release before, we really finished the movie with what's the end goal, how do we drive an audience, how do we market to them, how do we reach them. When we started really consulting with other ministry partners about not only is the content going to be great, but this is going to resonate because it connects to you at heart level in an authentic way.
And you did that from the very beginning, from the onset of the project?
Well, we saw the kids from SC made it for $25,000 on Kickstarter, and it has heart to it, and it's well-intentioned. It could be viewed as too earnest, but when we saw this could connect to the adoption, the pro-life, the Catholic Church, we started working with partners, including Focus on the Family, who went to Fathom and said, we think we can drive an audience of 97 million impressions that we can create through all our various channels. Fathom was a little bit reticent to believe that, but we had the largest walk-up audience ever for one of their events, I think, top 1 or 2% anyway. And it really was a result of the church owning that. An element of controversy, when you asked about the passion, helps. Yeah. And you've got to have the goods, as Mark said, it's got to be great content, it's got to be moving.
And that worked with God's Not Dead, right?
John, the beauty of the Dropbox, my family saw it. I took my kids. That's a powerful thing. I could take my kids and see it. And to sit there through that whole thing and having to read it as I went along, and I'm asking myself, why am I here? This is like I'm having to work. But it really resonated. I could see myself in it, in the cause. It was created, as we say, to what end, for what purpose. It was created with the audience in mind while telling an authentic story, and that is really important in this community, something that people can see themselves in.
Well, there was a call to action, too. There was a takeaway that we raised $1 million through people watching that film and texting or going to the website, in addition to doing over 300,000 paid admissions of $10 to $15 in over 3 nights. So people really got it and wanted to contribute. There was a call to action, and the church owned it. And it didn't have to be a major Lord of the Rings release to connect with the faith community, although I love it when we see those as well.
You know, scale is important. I mean, we haven't talked about television as all. When we created Quest last year for ABC, which was something that was aspirational, it was pro-family, it was about imagination, something that parents and children could watch together. That was the whole idea, and try to find the right partners that will support that kind of content, because TV is a huge opportunity for this sort of content and for the creators behind it.
You know, that's a beautiful point. We're here and we're artists and we're creators, but at some point in time, there's a commercial aspect to it, and we meet with major national advertisers every week, and there is a demand there for content, not only in the community, in the faith-driven consumer community, but in the brand community. They're looking for what they call green programming that will enhance their brand. So there's a tremendous amount of effort and energy being put forth in communities within the national advertisers who are also seeking this content.
So we have established the core audience, this faith-driven consumer audience, 41 million people, 17% of the U.S. population. We've talked about content, and I'm smiling at Derrick and Chris because we talked about this last night. The traditional strategy to reach this core audience is changing. You guys want to take that? Derrick, you said it has to change. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, it has to change. I think I've already answered that question, I think, because for me, it goes back to the actual content, because now when you're coming to a pastor and you're asking, so many people are coming to the pastor.
They're getting burned out.
And they're getting a little tired of coming back to them over and over and over again. However, if you have the right type of story and the right content that is being presented, then, I mean, it's an outreach. And so I think one has to work with the other. And so it's about us coming together to try to make sure that the content that is actually coming is stuff that we can feel proud and stick our chests out about.
But it has to be the pastor and the pew. Sorry, Mark.
But I think it's also back to the other part of what we said in the beginning. Including us in the conversation from the onset of the project will help to drive that, to keep that pastor engaged in that congregation and ultimately give you the numbers that you're looking for.
What were you going to say, Mark?
Saying, don't forget, there's the literal pew, and then there's the digital pew.
Exactly.
I mean, everyone should take it on themselves to create communities online that, that vibrate with that integrity, because if you're just operating literally in the physical space, you're missing a huge opportunity.
Yeah, because that's a really good point, because we have maybe 50,000 people that are streaming online each Sunday. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, Chris?
One of the things that we have discovered in working with faith-driven consumers, and we've built a large community that interacts with us, we're constantly asking them what they want. So we said, we're coming here today. What can we say to Hollywood? What does the entertainment industry, what do you want them to know? And they were very clear they wanted what they wanted from a content. We've talked about that. They also want the same thing that any other group that is included in America's Diversity Rainbow wants. They want compatible engagement, they want direct engagement, they want parity with other groups. So this diversity thing that is so prevalent in our society comes to this market, and I think Derrick spoke to it, is engage the community early, engage them often, listen to what they have to say. And the people that responded to our recent survey of what do you want us to say were predominantly women. We know that they're drivers of the decision in the home and in the marketplace. And this, there's a healthy tension that exists. There's great demand, but there's great skepticism. And the only way to overcome skepticism is in direct engagement. And that is something that we're seeing all over the country. Brands are engaging communities, and this one is no different.
And it's not very easy to do that, because within the faith space, there's all types of denomination. And so there's a language that you have to speak.
Yeah, a
a dialect, right. And you need to know what that is and what the sensitivities that can happen within those various denominations.
Can we all say amen? So, and actually,
if I can jump in just one second on that, the denominational aspect, the diversity aspect is very important, and that's why that graphic that we had up a minute ago is so important. The faith-driven consumer is that core. It's the solid foundation, and what we have found is when you target a broader audience, the faith-driven consumers don't necessarily come, and without them, the market really isn't complete. But what we also find is that if we target that faith-driven consumer as the core, just as if Mark had ignored those that loved The Lord of the Rings, or the Harry Potter fan base was left out of those movies, if that happened, you're missing a whole market. So start with the faith-driven consumer. That's the core. They're the only one in the faith and family market whose values are homogenous enough to be predictable and activatable.
So I want to get to this idea that we've all been talking about, and just real quickly before I do that, we know that the industry is learning. We know that there have been some big hits, some big misses. There's actually a panel coming up this morning that's going to talk about this. But Chris, can you just really briefly talk about Universal, which is the first studio to really have a hit this year, marketing directly to that core audience?
Most of you in this room, if not all, are familiar with this story, Unbroken, the story of Lou Zamperini. We had the privilege to work with Universal on the home distribution to the faith market. They created a Legacy of Faith edition, and in countless hours of talking to Lou's son, Luke, he would continue to say that Universal had a challenge, that his father's life was a 6-act life, and they only had 3 acts in the movie to show it. What Universal did is they created a faith-driven consumer targeted extra. They attached it to the DVD and sold it through Christian channels, where the rest of the story was told. And what we got was tremendous response from the community and saying, thank you. Many of them were disappointed originally that the whole story wasn't told. And we all know that's not always possible, especially in a general market movie. But having brought the rest of the story to the community, giving them a nod, was very desirable to community and profitable to Universal. And I'm not going to say any more because I'll steal the thunder of those yet to come.
So guys, Mark, John, we talked about this idea that a rising tide lifts all ships, and that our fundamental sort of collective thing here is we want to see everybody in this room be successful.
Absolutely.
And so this paradigm shift that's needed. Can you start us off, Mark?
Yeah,
on
one
that?
of the things we talked about last night, which is, the studios, the mid-range, moderate budget movie is like on the verge of extinction at a lot of studios, because studio slates are smaller in a lot of cases, and they're focusing on either very big tentpole movies or smaller, kind of nichier movies. But if you have a motivated core audience like this, you can bring back the Mr. Holland's Opuses and the Chariots of Fires, and where Heaven for Real is not a film that happens once a year, it happens 10 times a year across a spectrum of studios. There's an opportunity, I think, for the studios to do this, and it would benefit all of us, obviously, but it would benefit the studios as well, because everyone's looking for a motivated core audience.
Yeah, I see films coming out that fit that, but they're looking for a home. I see Lionsgate go after it. I see STX is on the horizon. Sony's obviously been doing it. But we have an opportunity to make these mid-range films, and there's a huge audience. And I look at a film like Woodlawn that's coming up that I think is relevant. It's got some stars in it. It's going to be powerful. Or Christ the Lord out of Egypt. These films were made independently, but they're in that range that if they hit the sweet spot, it'll be out of the park. We're doing a couple in that space as well, but I think there's opportunity. We need to communicate with our success and with the audience coming out for these films that there is a real opportunity and a missing sort of component of those mid-range films, and that you don't have to be either huge tentpole or dirt poor shot on, or shaky cam to make money in this space. Even the documentaries we're doing, the Unbroken, there's Lone Survivor, huge hit. You do a documentary on Marcus Luttrell, his love of country, love of faith, love of family. There's an audience for that, and they get that. And same with American Sniper. Taya Kyle is now out on the road talking about her husband, her faith, her family, her love of country. There's an opportunity to draft off of some of these big spends the studios are doing, and the studios are calling us when they see our docs doing so well, going, how do you drive this faith-based audience? Well, we are that audience. We're the ones who buy the tickets. We know better than anybody. There's an audience, if we can get out a powerful, well-made film that's authentic, that can draft off existing IP or has some recognizability, it's a true story, there's a real opportunity right now, and the studios are open to that. We just have to go into the marketing plan that shows we think we can deliver the audience based on this.
Right, and that's one of the things that we also talked about, right, is the polling shows clearly that demand is far outpacing supply. And so that there's a paradigm shift needed there. Chris,
Well, I challenge you when you leave here today or when you have a moment and have internet access, look up historically the movies that have performed, adjusted for inflation, that have performed well. And I did this the other day, and it was a continual flow of faith and family content throughout the history of the industry. Unless the world has fundamentally changed, and our research does not indicate that, there's still a market. I think Mark spoke to it very well. Find that middle place, create a paradigm shift of opportunity. Many people in this room are working on that product now. We just encourage you to keep moving with it and to get it in the pipeline.
Mark, John, just real quick, we're coming into our closing minutes. You actually have a project that has not been announced. That
it's funny.
You're going to announce
we're going to
today.
practice what we preach because we have a project at Sony with Devon Franklin called The White Tiger, which is based on the true story of Casey Terrio, a college football phenom, and it is exactly targeted to function in that moderate budget range, which Jay and I always define as sort of, let's call it the 15 to 40 range, and that's the sweet spot. That's where we want to see things happen.
And John, you as well have kind of two things in the works where you're looking around and even honing the hits and misses better.
We're trying to identify existing IP that has some brand awareness already, so it makes it easier for and partner ahead of time with marketing agencies. So we have a movie called The Star of Bethlehem, which is based on a best-selling documentary that's been released and sold 400,000 copies off the website with very little advertising, all social media, all word of mouth. So now we're going to stand on the shoulders of that to do a dramatic feature that we hope to release in about a year. But we'll take a year to also peddle it around, show it, and build the coalition of audience support for it.
And Derrick also has one in the works, which thanks a lot, Derrick. That's why Devon couldn't join us today. We blame you.
Well, no, I mean, Devon is very popular these days.
Yeah.
No, we are doing a follow-up to Heaven is for Real. Miracles for Heaven is the movie that we're doing. We start taping in Atlanta in about 2 weeks, starring Jennifer Gardner, and we're really excited about that. And it's right in that sweet spot, that same model, and we thank Sony for buying into that vision.
So, closing thought, Chris, when you hear all this and you have so much experience with that consumer base, where the people are buying the tickets, do you see more potential in what's coming down? Sometimes we've had some projects with really solid content, but we haven't seen the kind of the momentum that we wanted. Do you see that coming for these next projects?
We're grateful as a community, we're grateful as professionals in this business to see the level of content coming, to see the learning that is happening. We talked to some people yesterday and they said they had learned from the experience that they had over the last year. But to make it authentic, to look at it through the eyes of the consumer, caution you yet again, when you try to make it too general, we coined a word, it's very descriptive, the first time I think we've said it in public. If you target the core, those that stand on a solid foundation of their worldview, you get a strong base. The rest of the market, we call them squishtons. That's squishy Christian. That's a person who is motivated and driven by a lot of worldview factors. Their faith is not the driving point. Faith-driven consumers, 96% of them are driven by their faith in the entertainment that they watch, at least on a scale of 1 to 10, of an 8 to a 10. 61% say that faith is a 10 driver. Where else are you seeing that? Focus on them. We're excited. We see improvements, and the sky's the limit with this market. Lots of unmet need.
All right, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation with you.